So let's continue down our conversation in regards to groups. We were talking about groups and networks last. Now we're going to talk about the idea of groups and authority, as well as rationalization, which is a really important part of this course, in my personal opinion. Essentially, we're going to discuss a little bit more of what makes a group and how a group is run, as well as what Max Weber talks about, which is the idea of the rationalization of the process upon which we have gone towards in the post-industrial revolution, as well as when it started in the industrial revolution, as well as just in general, the further it's gone. So let's start with Weber's rationalization. Essentially, it's this, right? The process of going from a more traditional way to a more efficient way is referred to as the idea of rationalization. In the past, we did things just because we did them. Why was a king a king? Because God anointed them, because it's just the way it is. Why do I have to wash my hands before dinner? Because that's what I said. You may have heard from your parents. So it's this idea of following through the traditional value of why we're doing this. And society didn't just do this in little folk ways of like washing hands, right? It was also kind of like, why did women stay home and men went to work? Well, that's just the way that it was. And that isn't a great answer, honestly. Traditional does have a slower, more connected to nature and humanness idea, right? Minus all these typos on this slide, my apologies. Rational is more efficient, formal, and faster. So we're finding a faster and better way to do it. Another way to say this, if you want an easier way to say this, is how many of us say that I don't work harder, I work smarter. This is the move from traditional to rational. We are not trying to make society harder. We're trying to work it smarter. We're trying to find a more effective way to doing it faster, quicker, stronger, better, and all that good stuff, right? But the problem that can happen is that you can get stuck in an iron cage of rationalized structures. When we go down this path of rationalization to effectively increase the productivity of production, we also can lose the human-centered importance that is societal interactions. And that's actually kind of a big deal, right? Like half of our day-to-day basis is about exchanging culture and the fusion of beliefs and traditions and values. And if we take it and make it more rational, sometimes you're going to walk smack dab in the middle of a big problem that we take away what humans need and we enforce what the corporation needs. So Max Weber observed society's advancements and talked about as we talked about last module, correlated to the ideas that of a community of a transition from the traditional way, our ancestors did this because this or that, like I was just saying, to a much faster and quicker path. And the benefits of this are vast, as I was saying, but it also comes with problems. As we become more efficient, we run the problem of allowing the process to consume us, which is the idea of his iron cage of rationalization. If it consumes us, this, as Weber talked about, is the disenchantment of the world around us and is being locked in what he referred to as the iron cage. We've discussed this a little bit in the sense of the last module, not as much, but essentially this iron cage is kind of these cube farms, right? We're stuck in these cube farms and we're surrounded by people that work with us before work from home became a thing. But we're surrounded by people that work with us, but we don't know many of them. Usually you have one or two work friends, but you're in a room full of people. What? How does that even make sense? That we're stuck in this huge social element where we could meet each other like a sandbox in childhood, but we are so locked into the productivity of reaching the Q1, Q2, Q3 goals, Q4 goals, that we are more focused on the monthly reoccurring revenue of a company than our own salient connection to it, which is what Marx talked about with the alienation of society, right? So faster and efficient is noble and full of merit, but when mom and pop stores close because a business dies, that's not great. And you also have this idea, oh, we have a food desert. Okay, we'll open a Fry's. Well, the Fry's is now knocked out mom and Dave and Sally's local bodega, right? So this becomes a problem. And if you want to think of a really good example, and I know that it's an older movie, and I know a lot of you may or may not have seen it, go see the movie, rent the movie, stream the movie, however you can get your hands on it, Office Space. It is such a great depiction of the idea of the iron cage, because it's so true. And when you get into the work world, you're going to experience this, that we become parts of the cogs in the machines, and that becomes faster, quicker, and efficient. And that is rational. It's better than just saying, get to the kitchen, women, because that's what it used to be. I hate saying that, but it's a great example of the traditional problematic values that were there, right? Traditional is that we do it because we've always done it, right? This is religion. It can be outdated policies, why we have certain customs. Why do we shake hands? Why do we cheers, right? Do you know the reason to those things? I do. I study them because I think it's interesting. We shake hands, especially in the Wild West, because if you would use your primary hand, you would expose if you had a gun on you. We cheers because in the medieval eras, we would actually try, in many places after when there were kings, if you were worried about someone poisoning you, you would cheers your gauntlets together, right? Like you'd go in and you cheers these cups together, because what you'd be trying to do is slosh your drink into their drink to see if they'll drink the drink. That's why when you cheers, to you students, I drink after you drink. You know why? Because if you're willing to drink after our drinks is sloshed together, I'm assuming maybe you didn't poison me. So there were reasons behind these things. And many of the things we say, these are colloquial terms that will say things, and we don't know why we say them. Ring around the rosies about the Black Plague, right? There's so many different things that we have done and turned into songs, and bards used to sing and society used to interact. And those are when you talk about through traditional. And there's good behind tradition, right? Tradition has taught many, many, many generations how to act. Why do we greet somebody in America with handshakes? Why do we kiss someone on the cheek in Europe, right? These are traditions and they're great to pass down, but rationalization makes it more effective rather than just holding on to the because. So tying to the next thing here, we're going to talk about Weber's view as bureaucracy essentially being the epitome of rationalization. It is rigid, it is slow, it is effective. There's process structure, clear guidelines, chains of command. Weber essentially understood the dynamics of power, the importance of authority, and the will for humanity and how we need and use it. The idea of structure of the past was based on traditional values or methods. People were bosses because they were bosses and they maintained it. There wasn't really systems towards how we get promotion. Lenski talked about the idea of technology dictating the advancement of society. Bureaucracy was a move towards this. The institutions that governed and ran these changed as well. The perfect system does not exist. Well, it does exist in theory. So essentially in sociology, we view meritocracy as the ideal scenario. There just has never been a meritocratic society, and it's unlikely that there'll ever be one. This comes into the conversation that we will talk about, but is a big deal, of ideal versus real society. The ideal society has no racism and has no problems. The real society has these things. The real society uses ideal methods like installing social workers in problematic family situations, having safety officers police our streets. That doesn't always work out, as we're more than aware of in what's happening in the past 10 years. Weber essentially wanted us to have, if you're familiar with the website glassdoor.com, we're looking at jobs, to have a glass door towards understanding how I get to the tippy top versus how I'm at the bottom. Bureaucracies offered this essentially in the beginning. I wouldn't say that they're so time tested, but ASU is a bureaucracy, right? Public institutions are bureaucracies, but bureaucracy in theory provides a system that had more clear-cut guidelines, and that was a big deal. And it was the closest idea of a meritocracy that we had seen, especially in his time in the Industrial Revolution. Your view of the top was not blocked. There was no more iron ceilings. There were glass ceilings that needed to be shattered, but the iron ceilings were gone, and the way to get there was finally plausible. In fact, you could, and it was up for a question, but given the right situation, be unified in a fair structure where you know what's expected of you. Tying a little further into what Weber was talked about, we go into the idea of what establishes a bureaucracy. To clear the side is the rational structure Weber studied as the ideal type of the formal organization, hierarchy of authority, clear division of labor, explicit rules, and impersonal. This is a big deal, impersonal. So essentially what you're looking at with a rational structure of the treadmill production, where we're going to be on that treadmill and the production is being, we're just got to go forward, got to go forward, got to go forward. The progress needs to be there. There's so many ways to look at this treadmill of production, but it's the chain of command is also clear too. And unlike in field times, the leadership has a leader, the boss has a boss, the board has a managing director. When we know what our jobs are, X, and are managing to obtain Y, then we're able to complete the equation of what solves for X, right? Structure and order. We understand our tasks, our boss's tasks, and the people around us so that we do not feel alienated in the sense that we're alone in this situation. Rules are held to a standard, SOP, standards of procedures, and we have a way to complain if we're being mistreated, right? Because you have a book that says that these things are being in violation, et cetera, et cetera. And then you tie to this construction that the rules are held to a system of reward. And this is where the meritocracy comes. If you do X, Y, Z and do a little bit of A and B too, you could get a promotion and move up the corporate ladder. This opens up an open system where you're able to actually promote yourself within the structure instead of being stuck as just a labor person, someone who is just moving the products, moving the products, moving the products. It's better. And in personality, which is one of the things I want to point out here, because some people have a hard time with this, is a good thing because it reduces a lot of the bias, right? If someone's impersonal about the employees, then you do not establish favoritism, and then cliques are less likely to be provided, or cliques if you prefer the word. So everybody has the ability to taste the fruit of your labor you provide, not where you're from or who you are. And we see this with things like Title IX. We see this with like not and systems trying to hire more diversity and having systems where people of all creeds, races, and religions, backgrounds, and walks of life have a chance, because people are being impersonal about the employees. It's not about you, it's about what you produce. It's not about where you're from, it's about what you can bring. So what are some positives though? Well, we can serve many people. It has fairness and clear goal obtainment, as I was just talking about. It's a big deal. When you get in the workforce, how many people are you really able to bring on? How many people can you pay? How are we going to build wealth in this country? Fairness. Well, if I'm being held to a standard and so is my boss, at least I know that there's repercussions for bad behavior on all angles, not just one, right? You can't just have a spoiled boss's son upstairs smoking a cigar and being a terrible jerk. There are systems to punish everybody up to the very tippity top. Fairness is a very subjective word, and what is fair to you may not be so in the person next to you, but when rules are established and clear and enforced for all, it provides unity under this understanding, because there are guidelines for everyone. As I was just saying, if we are all held to the same standards, then we can remove some subjugation of class. That's a big deal, the subjugation of class. If you're a wealthy person, a lot of times in life, you don't have the same rules as those who are a little less fortunate, right? So if you have rules of order, standards, and procedures, it can help remove the gender and the race bias, as well as the class struggle, because you can start being able to say that people are being promoted, fired, or punitively punished based upon the breaking of rules, not on the color of their skin or their gender identity or their economics fortitude, right? So you want a promotion, work hard. You want to do this, great. Here's how you get here. You want to know what the next salary is? Glassdoor. So you have a little bit more of positive reinforcement through understanding what's expected of you. But not everything's peachy keen, right? Weber's notion of why these systems work as how efficient and structured they are. The problem with machine is that when it comes in motion, it stays in motion, right? It's hard to change the gears once things are going. And that's what a bureaucracy is. It's a well-oiled machine. Systems that function in a well-oiled and constructive way are not that keen on change. So you have slow to change. They're very slow to change. It is not much augmentation on the fly, on the by. So if social values and norms change, as we've seen in a lot of people with gender identity and being more inclusive, some of the institutions have had a harder time doing this because they have to change a lot. To change a little, they have to make a huge change because of how big the machine is and how the wheels are spinning. As the idea away from the traditional and into the efficient, the goal of organizations have grown to measure and obtain success are known. Right? So human behaviors and patterns and favoritism, you still have this, it's rigid. So it's hard to kind of, because of how effective it is and how vast it is, it becomes rigid and it's not so good at change, right? Slow to change, and potential power cliques or power struggles. Humans be humans. So no matter what, you have enough of the people on the top, they start building up unions, no, not unions, or cliques or groups, and they start promoting within. And this is something we try to avoid, but it still happens. And humans have a pattern of favoritism. And even with a bigger and better ability to know what is required of you, you can still run into that. We last talked about the ins and the out groups. That's when we just talked about ins and out groups. These internal created and divided groups can create power struggles that you have to be a part of, what they used to refer to as boys clubs or as favorites clubs, or as someone is being fed leads in the sales world, they'll say that. So you start seeing these ideas of inequity happening, right? So moving from the old makes people uneasy. So you have the idea with the old and with the new. These systems are so large that sometimes they're going to avoid trying to make changes because it's harder for them to do that. So there's some negatives there and they need to get fixed. But what you're looking at, as we talked about in the last slide, is that there are a lot of positives towards bureaucracy. And that's why Weber at his time, especially think about his Industrial Revolution time, saw it as the future. And we now need to change it. And that's one of the things that Ritzer actually was able to challenge. And we'll talk about that in a bit with the Mcdonaldization of society. But this is a thought experiment. This is where I want you to really think. Usually I'd have some time in class and we'd do this, but ideal versus real. Does the formal ideal organization always work as intended? If we have a food shortage right now, right? Can't find food. And we open up Fry's. But there's been food, there's been mom and pop shops. There's been these little organizations. You know what, we need more technology in here too. So we open up a Fry's and a Best Buy, and a ton of grocery stores and electronic stores shut down. Is that ideal? Because the real solution, it's providing a resource, but the ideal of having more opportunities there, the real ended up with having a lot of bad. So this ideal versus real becomes a really big thing. I would love some examples, some quick examples for you to think about and kind of fester on, and it doesn't always work as intended, is this, right? we want electric cars in California is trying to go green by what, 2035. Well, with all the electric cars powering on right now, we've had some issues with the grid and rolling blackouts, and so a lot of times they've been using fossil fuels to be able to promote the the charge needed to get us to that place. Well, if you're going back on your goal and using different types of fossil fuels to promote the idea of the electric, isn't that counterintuitive? Ideal versus real. So a town needs more food and resources, develops a megastore, local stores close. Close your eyes and picture a car. If I said to you a car, and then you all are going to probably picture something with four wheels and doors, but did you picture a coupe? Did you picture a SUV, a sports car? We don't all see the same thing. That's a big deal too. Ideal versus real is meaning it's a subjective dynamic, right? Thomas theorem, as well as your own bias, right? Within the sociology of a bureaucracy is an ideal type of formal organization. Unfortunately, ideal does not always mean best. Within the sociological understanding, it refers to the general model that describes the collection of characteristics, or a type that could describe examples of the items under discussion. The general goal attainment is that your work can show results. If you picture a system that provides a means towards obtaining a product, then you look towards the ideal versus the best, right? However, this is not the true best of any situation. If you need to develop a larger grocery store, the little shops may be replaced to meet that need. The need is managed, and what was wanted was provided, but there was impacts to reach that goal that were a negative outcome. If you asked for all the pictures of a car, if I asked you to all picture a car like I just said, we're all going to picture four wheels, but we're not going to picture the same vehicle. So realize that your idea of what you're looking for may not be what everyone else sees. And this is where we meet that ideal versus real. Great topic for Yellow Dig. I would love to hear some of these. We want to solve this, but we solved it and then this happened. It's an interesting way to go down that path, right? So now we're going to kind of shift into this idea of types of organizations. When it comes to types of formal organizations, broken down by theorist Etzioni in 1975 as three different types. These three types are normative, voluntary; coercive, non-voluntary, you're forced to go into them, right? And utilitarian, need-based organizations. So utility, that's the word there. Normative or voluntary. Think of organizations you'd want to be a part of. This could be the local PTA or being involved in a soccer league, Greek life, etc. Coercive are non-voluntary. This goes into places where you may be persuaded to join them or at least incentivized to join them. Be a part of them. You can tie this to, in some ways, military recruiting. Now, that's not always a coercive thing. Some people make a choice, and that's a fantastic choice for life. I have a lot of military in my family, but some of the recruiting places can be seen as a little bit more coercive. Once you join, it's a lot harder to leave. You don't just have that choice right away. So they get you involved in it, and they do things such as institutionalizations. Prisons can be seen as coercive. You don't have a choice. If you're committed on a 5150 in a psychiatric evaluation, that's coercive, right? And different things like that. And these are also what were often referred to as total institutions, because they will use resocialization to help make you an effective member of that community so that the institution can do its job. Utilitarian are need-based organizations. You join them because of a resources that it benefits you. You're going to ASU because you want a college degree. When you leave here, you'll have completed the utilitarian need for it. So these are places that you do something to achieve a goal. And this is what Etzioni called this idea: normative, coercive, utilitarian. Easier to remember normative as voluntary, coercive as non-voluntary, and utilitarian as need-based, but however you feel you can remember this, please focus on it. A little bit more breakdown on Etzioni's three formal organizations. We just covered it, right? Here's some examples: normative, ski clubs; unions, soccer leagues; coercive, prisons, psychiatric wards; military schools, total institutions; utilitarian, colleges, high schools, the workforce; bureaucracies, Weber's, as I mentioned, so these are ideal types of organizations when looking at these examples, right? So with great power comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben and a few other theorists have said this, right? But I like to quote Marvel: the idea of power authority has captivated and has captured the minds of men throughout the span of history. The control of the pen of time is the control of the way the world views everything. When people are in places of power, they are given certain levels of prestige and assumed understanding. However, the idea of who it can become a leader is not always the same. How can you gain authority? Power tends to be based on various methods of learning, right? You have traditional leaders, you have charismatic leaders, and you have legal rationale. And we'll talk about this in the next slide when we're going over what this is, but there are traditional leaders, right? You have traditional leaders, which are British monarchy, Queen Elizabeth, traditional gender norms, historic privileges ascribed to white men who look like me, right? You have charismatic leaders. This can be examples from all the way from Barack Obama to Adolf Hitler, right? There's a varying range. And legal rationale is when you have a lot of more of a guidelines, SOPs of how you do this. This is why Matt Weber believed that bureaucracies are needed, because they have those SOPs, standards of procedures, power legitimated by laws, written rules, Constitution, British Parliament. So there are ways of understanding this. There isn't a clear division of how leaders are understood. Leaders like Gandhi can be seen as both charismatic as well as legal rationale. So it kind of ebbs and flows between how we break this down. So again, primary groups, informal leadership; secondary groups, more formal leadership. This ties again back to how we understand primary and secondary as being emotive or as being instructional, right? Being a tool, right? There's different types of leader function: instrumental, goal-oriented, task completion, back to what we talked about before in the last lecture; generals, Fortune 500 companies, metric-based organizations; expressive, supportive, emotional. A lot of companies are trying to actually increase the user experience in order to capture this, that we need more expression, because we're learning that people like to be liked in companies, and that helps increases productivity. I did a whole thing where I created a personality assessment for my last company. If you're ever interested about that, email me. I've actually reverse and encoded all the personality tests into a platform called Motives Met, and built an algorithm around it to best match how your motives met. But as I said before, there are 3 different style types of leadership: authoritative, do what I say; democratic, what do you think; and laissez-faire, meh, leave it alone. But the primary group tends to have more of an informal leadership. Think about dyads and how they tend to be more collective. The secondary groups tend to be more rule focused, and this is when groups get an idea to think of when the company expands. No more similar dreams, no more investment based on the collective thought. This goes more towards the hive mind and trying to IPO, right? You're trying to make sure you can make that money. It becomes more about function, instrument, than it does about the idea of expressive and understanding. There are different approaches to leadership, and these functions are used to guide many people's crafts. If you interview for leadership roles later, they're going to ask you these things, right? Like, how are you lead? Are you someone's hands-on, hands-off? When you look at metric-based companies such as sales, military, and Fortune 500 companies, what you're going to see is a lot of goal-oriented leadership. As you leave, they're looking for, how are we going to get this for Q4? Let me look at the ARR and the MRR, right? The annual reoccurring revenue and the monthly reoccurring revenue. Let me look at the key performance indicators of my employees and see how we are actually obtaining goals, and do I need to install any PIPs or performance improvement plans, right? As you lead and focus on numbers, many organizations use expressive or support/emotional approach. This is using company culture, which is a big movement. The smarter, not harder, rationalization idea is helpful. Some styles of leadership tend to be a little bit more on the authoritarian style. You do what I say and you do it now tends to work for some people, because they really need someone to tell them what to do, because they want to listen. You also have democratic style of leadership where the employees are asked, well, how does that work? What schedule do you want? Do I need to make changes? The last style of managership was talked about as laissez-faire, which means leave it alone in French. Approach this is hands-off. It's effective. Someone who's a really good self-starter, it works, but if you leave someone on laissez-faire who needs instruction, they won't get anything done. These different types of leadership can be ebbed and flowed, and each of them can be integrated. You could have an authoritative laissez-faire person, someone who tells you what to do, but they know when to step back. It's really about how a leader leads that defines if they're a good leader. Tying back to everything we just talked about, with great power comes great responsibility. I already said that, right? And this is breaking down what I talked about earlier with traditional, charismatic, and rational, legal authority leadership. This is the slide I want you to think about for Yellow Dig. Give me some examples of leaders that were traditional, charismatic, rational, legal. Name some societies that follow this. It'd be a really good, fun conversation to have on Yellow Dig, and I advise you do so. Study this slide, right? There's great quotes here. Weber was pretty much defined by his understanding and how he broke down power. It's one of the things that held him out and made him one of the prophetic scholars that he is. He stated that the ability to exercise one's will over others, that's the definition of power. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton said this. With great power comes great responsibility. This is not his, but I do quote it to Spider-Man because I is nerd. And the measurement of what a man is, what he does with power. And Pittacus said this, right? So you have this idea of different ways of leadership. Definitely use this for Yellow Dig. I think it's a great tool to use for Yellow Dig. Trying to skip anything. All right, and then now we're going to flip it into Ritzer's Mcdonaldization. This is a fast and interesting construct. People have a hard time understanding this, but I'll do my best to explain it. And if you're curious, email me, right? Fast food models used across the institutions, right? Effective efficiency, getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Calculability, values placed on quantity and measurements rather than quality. So we go down that path. And predictability, familiarity, expectations, control, familiarity and expectation, sorry, and then control. The technology dictates what people do and checks on them. As the times advance, and Lenski talked about the technology driving society, we start looking at this, moving into Ritzer's idea of Mcdonaldization and the mass supply of products built on efficiency, calculability, and predictability, as well as control. We all want to be able to know what we can produce, consume, and replace in real time with real results. And the fast food world is quick and convenient, and we want to be able to drive through the lane and get the food that we want, and we're annoyed if it takes longer than 10 minutes, right? In 2021, we want to have the entire series released all at once. We get annoyed when companies do not just do the jump, one and dump and binge jump, right? And then the need for the episodic tales have become less likely. People used to wait weeks for stuff, right? In the early 2000s, we had the idea of having digital control of the world at the palm of our hand in reality. So we start to have this faster and faster and faster want. We've started to take consideration of the idea of cruelty in creation, but we also have talked about the idea of consumer fetishism. We don't taste the blood in the cookies, according to Emerson. So what you're seeing is that we have all this rationalization and efficiency, but we start looking at moving it towards how do we produce this effectively? And this is what Ritzer's conversation about challenging Weber's idea of rationalization and going down Mcdonaldization becomes a big deal. So what are some positives of Mcdonaldization? Well, simply know what to expect and get through a situation more quickly, predictability, efficiently. We know how it's done because it's done over and over and over and over again to a complete science. Easy to understand. If you know what to expect, then you know that you should be expecting, right? And fast-paced and goal-oriented. So, I mean, it just becomes pretty much the product of this generation. Fit, fast, quick, efficient, easy to understand. And it might not be the best, but we're going to get what we at least wanted quickly. Negatives, irrationality of rationality. It's one of my favorite things. What is intended to be efficient ends up breaking down and becoming slower. You want an example of this? Duo. Duo is literally irrationality of rationality. If I forget my phone before a lecture, I can't lecture, even if I'm there and I know my lecture, because I can't log in. If you are out and you're out on Tempe and your phone breaks, yeah, you can't even take my class because it was made to protect your identity, which is rational. But then the irrationality is that there's no fail-safe. You have to have that phone to be able to reify it, right? So like that's a problem. So I'd love to hear some examples in Yellow Dig of some irrationalities of rationality. There's so many. I think it's such a fun topic. Quantity becomes more important than quality. Well, that's great and all that we're going to have everything we want, but you know, there's a big problem coming out right now with Tesla that they don't send the correct models out and people have damages on their product, right? How many times have you ordered something and it's ripped when you get it? Like it's done so quickly in quantity that they forget about the quality, and that alienates the person from the, as we talked about before, the product. If I don't really care about what I'm creating, I'm just creating it quickly, what value does that have? Anyway, so the process is more important than those who are part of the production. Alienation from the product, right? We're looking right back at Marx again, and alienation from the process, product, and the people, as I was just saying. So what you're seeing is that we're just forcing the problems that Marx saw inside the Industrial Revolution in the post-industrial age, because we're trying to make it quick, fast, and easy. So as society becomes more fast-paced, the efficiency tends to be also create dependency and disconnection. Artificial technology is great in theory, but can also cause jobs to be lost. Giant mega stores providing fixing, but now people are no longer able to have mom and pop shops. Who do you think is going to lose their jobs when we start replacing buses with automated AI algorithm-based paths? The people who are low SES, socioeconomic status. Are your chicken nuggets real meat? You're not sure? We don't know. Do you really want to know? Not if it tastes good, but if I do find out, what am I going to do about it? Well, now I got to go cruelty-free. The pair of shoes are beautiful, look like $1 million, and they cost you $50. You wonder why? Because it's going to be the idea of labor disputing, right? Do you ever wonder if they were made in a sweatshop? Well, for $50, you get what you want, but do you want to be sure it's not that? And instead of being $1,500, your cogs and machines, and the machine's going to keep running on the treadmill of production, and it's going to keep going. It's going to keep going. And like Durkheim said, society is greater than the sum of its parts. So the negatives behind Mcdonaldization can strictly be the irrationality of rationality. Quantity becomes more important than the quality. The process is more important than those who are part of it. And right back to Marx, right? Alienation of the product, the process, and the people. This brings us to the end of talking about groups, authority, and rationalizations. I really hope you have enjoyed this. If you have any thoughts, questions, queries, inquiries, please make sure to reach out to myself or my TAs. I look forward to hearing from you. If you do have questions, please make sure you fill out your yellow dig, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next lecture as we go forward in this course. We're getting more towards the tail end of this course, so make sure you're keeping up to date. It's important not to let the ball slip on one of these shorter courses as we are taking this, and it's not 15 weeks. I'm a resource to help you. As always, I'm happy to be here for you if you need me. Please reach out if you need anything, and I will look forward to speaking with you in the next video. Peace.